I'm Dr. Calum Durux, and this is Psychax, Better Living Through Psychology. Today's talk is about a topic many whisper about but few dare to speak aloud. Why do successful men, men of power, wealth and prestige, use escorts? And more importantly, what does that tell us about the world we live in, about desire, value, and the social exchange between men and women? You see, the common judgment is that this behavior reflects moral decay, emotional weakness, or relational failure. But what if it's the opposite? What if this pattern reveals a deeper truth about the transactional nature of intimacy, about the difference between access and authenticity, and about what the rich and the beautiful instinctively understand? We're not here to glamorize or demonize. We're here to explore the uncomfortable, undeniable psychology behind one of the most controversial behaviors of elite men, and how it reflects the quiet desperation, the hidden logic, and the cold math that governs male-female dynamics when all the masks are off. Let's start by cutting through the noise. Successful men don't use escorts because they're desperate. They don't lack options. These are not men who can't get attention. They are not scraping the bottom of the barrel hoping to feel desired. No, they are, in fact, surrounded by women. They are chased, flirted with, smiled at. They are courted in private and praised in public. But here's what most people don't understand. Access doesn't equal honesty. When you're a high-status man, every interaction is filtered through your status. You don't know if she's into you or what you represent. You don't know if her laughter is genuine or strategic. You don't know if her vulnerability is real or rehearsed. And over time, this starts to eat away at your sense of reality. You don't want performance. You want truth, even if that truth has a price tag, because the transactional is at least transparent. The escort doesn't pretend. She doesn't play the long game. She tells you what it is. And for a man who spent years decoding subtext, that clarity is worth more than gold. Now you might ask, why not just find a woman who genuinely loves him? That's the dream, right? The fairy tale ending. The humble, beautiful girl who loves you for who you are, not what you have. But here's the catch. The more success you accumulate, the harder it is to tell the difference between love and strategy. High-status men live in a fog of incentives. They attract women not because of who they are, but because of what they signal: safety, provision, power, experience, and social access. And when you live in a world where every smile might be a mask, every compliment might be bait, every connection might be transactional, eventually, you begin to choose your own transactions. Why? Because when the game is already transactional, the man who pays is in control. He's no longer a pawn in someone else's strategy. He's choosing the terms. And for the man who spent his life being chosen for his bank account, his title, or his last name, that choice is liberation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Rich men and beautiful women are two sides of the same coin. One holds economic value. The other holds aesthetic value. Both attract attention, but rarely authenticity. The rich man can't trust her motives. The beautiful woman can't trust his depth. He wonders if she's there for the yacht. She wonders if he's there for the curves. And so, both learn to control the game. The rich man pays for what others beg to be given. The beautiful woman receives what others work years to earn. And neither of them is necessarily immoral for doing so. They're simply living in a world that rewards clarity over confusion. Think about it. The rich man doesn't want to perform. He doesn't want to ask about your day, fake a connection, or go on 10 dates hoping you don't flake. He wants the outcome, stripped of the politics. The escort gives him that, and in return, she receives not just money, but the security of honesty. No mixed signals, no games, just an exchange agreed upon by both parties. Pure, clean, cold, but honest. And before you judge him, ask yourself this. How many of your relationships were truly free of transaction? How many women chose you without calculating your potential, your stability, your future? How many were attracted to your truth, not just your traits? Most men will never know the answer because they never had the leverage to ask the question, but the successful man does. And once he realizes that even his wealth can't buy genuine love, only access, he starts to seek a different currency: control, not over her, but over the dynamic. He wants the power to say, "This is what I want. This is what I'll pay. This is what I expect. Nothing more, nothing less." In a world filled with false promises, strategic courtship, and emotional games. This simplicity is intoxicating. And whether we like it or not, it reveals something brutal about human nature. When trust becomes impossible, transaction becomes freedom. Let's go deeper. What most people don't realize is that the high-value man doesn't fear being alone. He fears being used. Not in the crude sense, not stolen from or manipulated outright, but in the slow bleed of his time, energy, and presence being consumed by women who never really saw him. And so, rather than invest in a romantic illusion that may crumble under the weight of expectation, he chooses an agreement that has no illusions, no pretending, no good morning text followed by days of coldness, no emotional unavailability masquerading as independence. With an escort, there are no ghosts. There's just clarity, and this is where people get confused. They think intimacy must always be romantic to be real, but that's false. Sometimes the most honest moments happen when the stakes are clear, when the roles are known, when both people are allowed to be who they are, not who they're trying to sell themselves as. And in a world where most people are constantly selling, sometimes what the successful man craves most is a moment without negotiation. And this brings us to the core principle. Control isn't about dominance, it's about predictability. Successful men don't seek to dominate others. They seek to navigate life without surprises that cost them peace. When you've built empires, carried teams, risked millions, and made decisions that affect lives, the last thing you want is a romantic partner who's emotionally unstable, strategically manipulative, or just another actor in a grand social performance. You crave calm, you crave intentionality. And escorts, when chosen well, offer exactly that. They're not just women who show up. They're women who understand their role, who don't play games, who operate within boundaries, and who offer something that no amount of romance can promise, no emotional chaos. The irony? The man being judged for paying for intimacy is often more emotionally intelligent than the man losing years of his life to a woman who plays pretend. Because at least the successful man knows what he's buying, and that's more than most men can say. There's also a deeper reason, one few men will ever admit out loud, and that is the freedom to not be chosen for anything other than presence. You see, when a successful man is with an escort, there's no pretense. She doesn't care about his vision board, his ambition, his 5-year plan, or his latest investment. She doesn't ask what he drives or what legacy he's building. For that hour, he is not a provider, not a mentor, not a leader. He is a man, stripped down to the most basic element, his desire to be wanted, not for what he gives, but for what he is. And while yes, the context is transactional, the feeling, however brief, is pure. No expectations, no long-term planning, no obligations, just a moment of being seen without responsibility. Most men never experience that. Their entire worth is measured by output, but the escort doesn't care about output. She only cares about showing up for the agreement. And in that, she gives the successful man something no relationship has ever given him, a moment to just exist. This is the part no one talks about, the psychological fatigue of being everything to everyone. Successful men aren't just rich, they're depended on, they're leaned on, they're admired, envied, expected to solve problems, lead groups, fix mistakes, carry burdens. They're never off the clock. And so when a man like that seeks out a paid connection, it's not because he can't get a woman. It's because he's tired of carrying the emotional weight of other people's needs. With an escort, he's not responsible for her dreams. He's not a therapist. He's not an ATM. He's not a ladder for her self-esteem. He's simply present. And for once, he doesn't have to do, he just has to be. That space is priceless. Not because he can't find it elsewhere, but because no one else gives it without asking for something in return. That tiny transaction, that paid moment of peace, is often more real than years spent in relationships where his worth was measured in output. Now, don't get it twisted. This isn't about glorifying the transactional. It's about exposing the fact that all relationships are transactional. The only difference is whether you're aware of the terms. Most men live inside unconscious contracts. If I do enough, she'll love me. If I provide enough, she'll stay. If I'm perfect enough, she'll stop testing me. These are the invisible negotiations that drain your spirit, and you do them without knowing. The successful man simply flips the script. He says, if it's going to be transactional, let it be honest. And in that honesty, he finds peace. because he's not asking for love, he's asking for clarity, and clarity is the one thing money can buy. And ironically, when you have everything, the one thing you start to value most is clarity of intention. And that's why some of the most successful, powerful men on the planet, the ones you admire, follow, and dream to be like, quietly choose the path that gives them control, peace, and a place to rest their identity, even if just for a moment. At the heart of this conversation is a psychological principle most people overlook: the value of discretion. In traditional relationships, your status becomes a public bargaining chip. You're expected to post the photos, meet the family, make the announcements, and publicly showcase your devotion as proof of commitment. But high-status men often find that the more they give away publicly, the more they lose privately. Their lives aren't their own, their moves are dissected, their emotions weaponized. But when a man engages with an escort, the transaction is discreet by design. There are no shared Instagram posts, no stories to curate, no external validation required. It's not about hiding, it's about preserving sovereignty. In that space, the man remains fully himself. Not a persona, not a role model, not a future husband, just a man reclaiming control over his time, his presence, and his narrative. That kind of discretion is priceless for men who are watched by the world, because privacy isn't just comfort, it's power. This is also why so many people misunderstand the motivations behind this dynamic. They judge it from the outside, not realizing that escorts don't replace intimacy, they protect it. Think about it, most successful men are guarded, they don't trust easily. They've seen what happens when vulnerability is exploited, not just by women, but by friends, partners, even family. So when they engage with someone who isn't emotionally entangled, they can feel again, even briefly, without risk of manipulation. It becomes a controlled outlet. And in many cases, it helps these men stay emotionally intact in other areas of life. Rather than suppressing desire, pretending they don't need touch, or letting resentment build toward women who play emotional games, they seek a simple, clean experience that allows them to reset. You may not understand it, you may even disapprove, but to the man who's been burned, betrayed, or taken for granted, it makes psychological sense. And that's what most critics fail to grasp. Not everything men do is about pleasure. Sometimes it's about peace. Now let's be honest about something else. Many of the women who criticize successful men for using escorts aren't actually mad about the morality. They're mad about the lack of leverage. See, in modern dating, emotional access to a high-value man is a currency. Women who gain it use it for validation, status, and lifestyle elevation. When a man bypasses the dating maze and goes straight to the controlled interaction, he's removing their power. He's saying, I don't need your games, I don't need your tests, I don't need your approval. And that scares people, because a man who doesn't play the game can't be controlled by it. Escorts offer a loophole, and women who rely on their beauty as currency fear that loophole because it levels the field. It takes the mystery out of attraction and turns it into a negotiation. And when men start making conscious negotiations rather than emotional investments, everything changes. That shift isn't just personal, it's disruptive. And that's why so many react with such hostility. Not because it's wrong, but because it works. You also have to understand the broader sociological truth. When emotions become a liability, structure becomes a necessity. And for high-powered men, emotions are often liabilities. They distract, they destabilize, they cost. A bad relationship can destroy your business, your image, your peace of mind. And it doesn't matter how good it once felt, if it ends in betrayal, chaos, or drama, it'll stain everything you built. So these men stop betting on emotion, they start betting on systems. And a professional system, one with boundaries, discretion, clear terms, gives them something most modern relationships don't: predictability. And when a man's net worth is tied to his focus, he chooses anything that supports it, including, yes, transactional intimacy. Because to him, the worst thing isn't loneliness, it's emotional chaos. And when you fought your way through life to find peace, you'll do anything to protect it, even if it means being misunderstood, even if it means going against the grain, even if it means choosing clarity over romance. Let's also get brutally honest about male biology. Men are wired for conquest, yes, but what they really want isn't just sex, it's certainty. They want to know where they stand. They want to know they're wanted, not tolerated, that they're seen, not sized up, that they're chosen, not just accepted because they check the right boxes. And sadly, most romantic dynamics today don't offer that certainty. They offer tests. They offer manipulation masked as empowerment. They offer attention games disguised as chemistry. So what does a successful man do? He cuts the game entirely. He says, I don't need your drama. I don't need your loyalty tests. I don't need your passive aggression. He finds a path where his value is acknowledged up front, where his worth isn't tied to how long he waits for a reply, where he doesn't have to beg for softness, stability, or feminine energy. He buys it, not because he's weak, but because he's tired of being strong in silence, and for once, he gets to receive, not prove, not chase, just receive. There's another piece of this that's rarely spoken, but deeply understood among powerful men. Time is the ultimate currency. For every man building something bigger than himself, a company, a legacy, a movement, time becomes more valuable than money. Every conversation, every dinner, every emotional roller coaster costs him focus, and focus is where his power lies. So when dating becomes a time sink, when it becomes a circus of texting games, emotional inconsistency, and endless energy output, the successful man recalibrates. He doesn't want to fight for clarity. He doesn't want to waste 6 months figuring out if she's sincere. He doesn't want to gamble on emotional ROI. He wants to know exactly what he's getting. And in that sense, escorts don't just offer intimacy, they offer time efficiency. They offer a break from the performance, the posturing, the unspoken expectations. He's not just paying for her company, he's protecting his time from being hijacked by uncertainty. And that, to a man with limited bandwidth and massive responsibilities, is not just practical, it's essential. Now let's talk about freedom, real freedom. Not the kind marketed to you by dating coaches or alpha gurus, but the kind that lives in the quiet knowing that you don't owe anyone a performance. High-value men often find themselves imprisoned by the expectations of those around them. Be charming, be strong, be romantic, be emotionally available, be unavailable, be spontaneous, be strategic, be everything, all the time. And after a while, that prison wears you down. You begin to wonder if anyone sees you beneath the performance. And that's the moment where transactional intimacy becomes not just appealing but revolutionary, because for 1 hour, the performance stops. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to read her mind. You don't have to impress. You're not being evaluated, you're just being received. And the paradox? That moment, paid for and planned, becomes the most honest moment a man has had in years, because it's free of masks, free of roles, and sometimes that's the only freedom a powerful man can find in a world that never stops watching. And then there's the deep, unspoken truth about status itself. It dehumanizes. When you become a symbol of success, people stop seeing you as a person. They see a figure, a brand, a resource. And women, whether consciously or not, often respond to that symbol, not the man. They don't ask how his day was unless it serves their connection. They don't sit in silence with him unless there's something to gain. So he starts to build walls, not because he doesn't want love, but because he's not sure it exists for him anymore. Love requires vulnerability, but vulnerability requires trust. And trust becomes a luxury when every interaction is potentially opportunistic. So, when he hires an escort, he's not rejecting love. He's seeking emotional neutrality. He's seeking interaction that isn't laced with ambition. And in doing so, he reclaims a small piece of his humanity. Not because it's ideal, but because it's real, in a world that constantly turns him into something else. Let's not pretend this is about sex. It's never just about sex. If it were, high-value men could have it on demand. What they want is control without chaos, clarity without consequences, intimacy without interrogation. And the escort, for all the assumptions people make, becomes the most psychologically safe space they know, because there's no guessing, no guilt, no gaslighting, just a transaction that gives both parties what they need on their own terms. And this is what scares people. It undermines the traditional courtship model. It strips away the fantasy that love is always organic, always pure, always fair. It exposes the truth: relationships are trades. Whether you're trading love for loyalty, time for attention, or presence for peace, there's always an exchange. The only question is whether the terms are spoken or silent, and a successful man, he prefers them spoken, because at his level, deception is the most dangerous game of all. Lastly, let's talk about cost, not in dollars, but in emotional erosion. Every failed relationship chips away at something in a man: his trust, his optimism, his drive. And while some learn to rebuild, others learn to restructure. They decide that instead of pouring energy into uncertainty, they'll invest in structure, into agreements, into boundaries, into moments of control. Escorts, for all their controversy, provide that structure. And in a chaotic world, a world where love often feels more like leverage and vulnerability feels like suicide, structure becomes a sanctuary. Is it perfect? No. But it's predictable. And when you've spent your life managing risk, building empires, and surviving betrayal, predictability isn't boring, it's sacred. It's the difference between being drained and being able to show up for the world again. And that, at its core, is why successful men choose this path. Not because they're broken, but because they've seen too much and they've learned what works. At some point, the successful man learns to stop fighting what the world is and starts navigating it with eyes wide open. He accepts that the dating market is no longer about love in its purest form. It's about leverage, optics, and attention. It's about validation games and invisible scorecards. And when he accepts that, he stops resenting it. He doesn't become bitter, he becomes strategic. He no longer seeks a fantasy, he seeks alignment. And in the absence of aligned intimacy, he constructs something functional, not ideal, but effective. Escorts represent that construction. They're not a substitute for real connection. They're a tool for protecting the man who has to give the world everything. Because when no one is checking on his soul, his peace, his truth, he learns to find sanctuary in the one place where the price is known, the roles are clear, and the risk is zero. That's not weakness, that's survival. And survival, in the emotional jungle of modern masculinity, is a win few men ever achieve. And let's be real, not all successful men go down this road. Some find true love, some find partners who respect their vision, value their peace, and don't drain their energy, but they are rare. And rarer still is the woman who doesn't see his power as a prize to possess, but a burden to honor. Most men never experience that. So when the rare man realizes that most of his romantic experiences are shaped by what he can give, not who he is, he stops romanticizing the process. He chooses honesty. Cold? Maybe, but real. And in a world where fake connection is free and real presence is taxed, men of power pay for what others only pretend to receive, and they sleep better for it. Not because they're emotionally stunted, but because they've finally stopped begging to be understood. They've finally stopped trying to be enough for people who were never showing up for them, only for the dream they represented. That shift isn't tragic, it's transformative. It's also worth saying this: just because a man chooses structure over chaos doesn't mean he's closed off to love. In fact, many high-value men who use escorts are deeply romantic. They crave emotional safety, nurturing, respect, and softness. But they've learned to separate their fantasy from their function. They don't chase love in every woman. They don't try to extract meaning from every moment. They know when to suspend the search, not because they've given up, but because they're protecting the ground they've already claimed. The empire they've built, the peace they've earned. And until someone comes along who meets them with that same clarity, maturity, and emotional strength, they will not compromise. The escort then becomes a placeholder, a pause, a space to exhale, not the destination, but the bridge between chaos and calm. And for a man who's always giving, that bridge is a necessity. Not because he's lost, but because he's done losing himself. So what do the rich and the beautiful really have in common? They both operate in economies of perception. Their value is seen before it's known, assumed before it's experienced, and as a result, they attract interest, not always intimacy. The beautiful woman is pursued, but rarely understood. The rich man is admired, but rarely loved. Both live behind masks projected onto them by society. Both have to guard their souls from being consumed. And both, when honest, admit that they crave something unfiltered. That's why they play the game differently. That's why they don't apologize for choosing efficiency over illusion. The rich man pays to avoid chaos. The beautiful woman selects carefully to avoid being objectified. Both are strategic, not broken, not shallow, just tired of pretending. And in that honesty, they reclaim something no one can fake: self-respect. In the end, this isn't a story about sex. It's a story about clarity, peace, and the high cost of emotional safety in a world that's forgotten how to offer it freely. When you judge the successful man who seeks transactional intimacy, ask yourself, what are you really doing in your relationships? Are you showing up with honesty, or are you negotiating affection behind a mask of romance? Are you offering yourself, or just your demands? Because the man you mock for paying for intimacy may be living with more emotional integrity than most, choosing control over chaos, structure over seduction, and peace over posturing. That's not cowardice. That's wisdom born from battle. And until you've walked in the shoes of the man who gave everything and got manipulation in return, don't mistake silence for shame. He's not hiding, he's healing, one clear boundary at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that's the highest form of self-respect a man can reach.